In this section, we'll learn how to create a real mobile app that you can put on the App Store or Google Play with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There are a number of obvious benefits to doing this. First and foremost, that you can just develop once and then deploy your app to a number of different systems. It also, of course, allows you to use your HTML and JavaScript skills in app creation without having to learn the specific languages and systems of each different mobile platform. I should say at this point, though, that there are some disadvantages of doing it this way. And although we'll see how to access many of the phone's features, such as the accelerometer and the camera, we won't have access to all of the features that we would get if we were developing the app natively. You also can experience performance issues because you're running effectively a mobile website within your app, so it's not going to be as fast or as fluid as a native app. Having said that though, if you just want to make something pretty simple or you want to get a demo out there as quickly as possible, then building apps with HTML is a perfectly good option. There are a number of different frameworks and platforms to choose from when developing HTML-based apps, but we're going to focus on two in this section. And the first is App.JS, which you can download at code.kik.com/app/2. And this is just a collection of CSS styles and JavaScript functions that make it much easier to make your HTML page look and behave like an app. On that page, you can see a few of the demos. And so here we can change the color of the title bar at the top there. And we can also view lists, buttons, inputs, etc. And you can see that it behaves pretty similar to how a mobile app does. It also looks pretty modern and has a style fairly similar to the default iOS stylings. But this is what we'll be using on the HTML side. Then once we've built the app, we're going to be using Phonegap Build to actually deploy it to a number of different platforms. And I'm going to show you specifically how to deploy to Android and iOS. So Phonegap Build is free to use for a single app, and you'll be able to get your app not only on iOS and Android, but pretty much every mobile platform that's out there. So it's a really great system, and it also includes a huge range of plugins which allow you to do a number of specific things on particular devices and use the particular phone features such as camera, accelerometer, etc. So there's a whole new world opening up to us here, and we're going to start looking at App.JS in the next video. So App.JS is one of a number of HTML frameworks out there. In the previous version of the Complete Web Developer course, I actually used jQuery Mobile, and you're very welcome to check that out as well. The main reason I've switched to App.JS is because jQuery Mobile hasn't been updated substantially, and the apps that you build with it simply don't work as well as I'd like, and they don't look that great either. So App.JS is very simple, it's good looking, and it's easy to get started with as well. So on that note, let's click download, and that will download App.JS version 2 to our desktop. And then we'll open that up, and I'm actually going to copy that, and then we'll create a new folder within the Complete Web Developer course. So, new folder, and I'll of course call this 9 mobile apps. And then we'll place our App.JS in there. And you can see we've got the CSS, the JavaScript, a file called zepto.js, which I'll tell you about in a minute, and then index.html. So let's open up index.html in Chrome and see what it looks like. It's not a great deal to look at, but we've got our homepage bar at the top, and then we can click on page 2, which takes us to page 2, and very nicely that automatically gives us a back button at the top there to take us back to homepage. That's one of the many features of App.JS which make it a huge time saver compared to coding your own mobile app. So to investigate how App.JS works, we're going to start by looking through the code of the homepage, and then we're going to try and recreate this demo app on the App.JS homepage to get a bit more detail as to how it all fits together. It's worth saying that, as usual, we're not trying to become App.JS experts here. we're learning how to get to grips with a new framework quickly to allow us to get on with our development projects as quickly as possible. So let's go back over to the Finder and open index.html in brackets. So here's the code. It's very familiar. We've got our usual HTML header with a title, viewport, and style sheet, and got an empty set of styles there. So nothing new there. And then we've got our app page with a data page attribute of home. If we look further down here, we've got a data page attribute of page 2. So what we've actually got going on here is that each page of the app is its own div. So we don't have multiple HTML files here, we've just got a single HTML file with each page of the app having its own app page div. And then within that, we've got the app top bar, the app title, and then app content, app section, and the only thing that we had here was a button saying go to page 2. And page 2 is very similar, although we do have this app button left class with a data back, data auto title pair of attributes. As you might imagine, essentially creates the back button for us. But then the content is pretty minimal. So that's all fairly clear so far. Now we come to this Zepto.js. Let's have a quick look at what Zepto is. It's essentially a small version of jQuery. So we'll use all the same commands as we do in jQuery, but it's a much smaller file size and everything in theory is a lot faster than with jQuery. So it's ideal for working with mobile devices. If you do find that there are some jQuery functions that you need that are not covered with Zepto, then that's fine. You can just remove Zepto here and replace it with jQuery. But when you're working on mobile, it will almost certainly have all the functions that you need. So it's probably worth going with something like Zepto rather than the full jQuery. Then we've got our App.JS JavaScript code. And finally down here, we've got a bit of custom JavaScript. And it looks to me like this function will be called when the home page is loaded. So let's test out that theory just by putting an alert in there. Yep, we get that pop up when the home page is loaded. So that's what's going on there. And presumably this does the same thing but for page 2. Let's just check. Yeah, there we go. Fantastic. And then we've got app restore. Let's just comment out app restore and see what happens. Right. So it seems to me that app restore is loading the whole page and applying all of the App.js styles and JavaScript functions to it. So without that, we wouldn't have anything. And this try and catch setup is JavaScript code for essentially saying, try to do this, and if you have any problems, then just load the home page. And that's actually pretty standard terminology and works exactly the same in, say, Swift and Java as well. So I think the basic setup looks pretty clear. So let's go back and check out the demo and see if we can recreate it and in the process learn a bit about how we could make our own App.js app. Now this demo is actually in an iframe here, so we can use Control-click and then view frame source to view the HTML source of that iframe. So let's try and recreate what's going on here bit by bit. So we've got some styles at the top. We might use some of those at some point, but I'm more interested in the look of the app at this point. So you can see we've got our title as before, and here we've got a paragraph of app section. So let's try putting that into our app. We've actually got a div with a class of app section there, but let's pop this in before that div and see how it looks. Okay, so we can actually make this a bit narrower so it looks a bit more like a phone screen. So that just gives us a nice separated section with nice rounded corners and everything else. So let's try and recreate these color boxes here. So we've got another class of app section, and it looks like it's got the colors built in. So let's have a look. Aha. So we're definitely going to need some custom styles to apply those. That's likely what's going on at the top here. So we've got some styles for the scroll page. We'll look at that a bit later on. Some backgrounds for the WebKit keyframes. They are the animations for when new pages are fading in or out. So we've got the background colors for those. And then we've got our specific styles for our color picker. So let's use those in our style section as well. And let's take a look. Wonderful. So now we've got these nice clean color sections, but of course they don't change the top bar background yet. So there must be some JavaScript which does that. Let's have a look down. And here we go. Now there's quite a lot going on here, including a bit of local storage, which we'll be talking about in the next video. So instead of just copying and pasting this code, we're going to attempt to recreate what the demo is doing with our own code. So essentially what we want is for when one of these is clicked on, it updates the top bar there to have that background color. Shouldn't be too tricky, right? Well, first of all, let's think where we would want to run that code. We'd want to run it both when the home page is launched and when page 2 is launched as well. So I'm going to set up a function. I'll use their function name, set up page color. I do like that they're spelling color with a U, always nice. And we'll have a page variable that's going to be passed to that function as well. And that will allow us to run that function from both of those pages without having to include the code twice. Okay, just to make sure everything's connected up right, let's do a quick alert. There we go. Hi, and on page 2 it does the same thing. Wonderful. So we're going to need our app to do two things. We're going to want to get the color of the background here, and then we want to set the color of the background to the same. If we look through the code here, it looks to me like this code would be very useful to us. So this looks through the page, it finds a UL with a class of color picker, and then it finds all the LIs, the list items, within that unordered list. It makes them clickable, and then when they're clicked, it runs a function that does something with old color that I'm not sure we're that interested in, but more relevantly, it gets the color of the clicked item from the data attribute, which you'll remember has a data color blue, data color dark blue, etc. So let's copy that part there. I'm happy to copy that bit of code because it's pretty familiar to us and we know how everything is working. What I don't want to do is just copy the massive chunk of code and not really understand it. So let's then just close our function code there. So let's create the variable color, and for now we'll just alert it, and that will just check to see if we've got the right color. There we go. So green, yellow, orange. Brilliant. So we've achieved the first part. Now let's update the title bar with that color. Again, let's have a look at the source code. It looks to me like removing classes and adding classes is going to be pretty important here. So let's add the class first. And it looks like the class that we're going to add is simply color. So let's take a look the div that we'll want to update. So it looks like app top bar is what we want to be updating. So let's get rid of our alert and find app top bar. Oh, it's a class rather than an ID. And we want to add the class color to it. So let's just see if that works in itself. It may do. There we go. In fact, it almost does, but not quite. And the reason it doesn't work completely is because we're just adding lots and lots of classes on top of each other. So that's what this old color is doing there. It's removing the previous color that was added so that we can add the new color onto it. So let's set up our variable old color, which initially we'll have as empty, but then when we've updated the top bar to a particular color, we can remove the old color class. And to do that, we'll need to know what that was. So we'll set old color to color. And so first time round, say we click on the yellow, then we'll make the top bar yellow and we'll set the old color to yellow. And then we'll need to remove the old color class before we add the new one each time. There we go, and that should now remove the old class as well as adding the new one. So we should now be able to, oh dear, nope, that's gone horribly wrong. I suspect that's because initially it's trying to remove an empty class, which then removes what class it did have, which loses all the styling up there. So instead of just having an empty variable here, let's set it to an empty string, and then we can just use an if statement to check if old color is not an empty string, then remove that class. And that should get around that problem. We should now be able to update that. There we go, without any problems. Wonderful. Let's just add a couple of these items lower down then. I'll go for buttons and lists, and we'll actually be looking at inputs in a couple of videos time. So it looks to me like lists is a separate page with a big long chunk of code containing all those lists. Alright, so I'm going to use Command F and search for lists. Here we go, and that gives us this code here. So I'm going to copy that HTML because I think I understand it. While I'm here, I think I'll copy buttons as well. And that will give us 2 new pages. So we'll leave page 2 in there for the moment. But we've now got lists, which indeed looks pretty straightforward. It's what we're used to seeing. And then buttons as well. Looks like it should be pretty standard. So let's create our code to jump to the lists page. So I'm going to copy the code to jump to page 2, and then notice the lists page had a data page of lists. So we can just use lists there, and we want to set up the page color there as well. And the only other thing we'd need to add is the link to lists on the home page. So we should be able to find that if we search upwards for lists. And here we go. So here's our div with a class of app section. And it's got our links to lists, buttons, inputs, and scrolling. So let's put in that just below the top bar colors app section. There we go. Let's take a look at that. So that's looking good. Now if we click on lists, you can see it jumps very nicely to our list page. And notice that we didn't put a link in there. We didn't use an A with an href. We just used a class of app button and a data target of lists. And then the JavaScript within our framework interpreted that as a load of the lists page here. And that then does all the hard work of putting the back button and everything else. Great. So adding the buttons code should be straightforward. In fact, it might already work as it is. Yep, it does. Wonderful. So we can click those buttons and they behave very similarly to native buttons on iOS and Android. The one final thing I'm interested in here is this dialog, because dialogues are pretty useful to us in mobile applications. And that looks very iOS-like. So let's see how we recreate that. So again, we'll search for dialog. So it's got a class of app button and app menu. So let's search for app button. So there's a lot of them there. I wonder if there are any in the JavaScript. Nope. So let's have a look for app menu instead. Aha. So this looks interesting then. So we're searching through the page again, finding the app menu class, and then when it's clicked, we use the app dialog function, which opens up that dialog and displays it very, very similarly to iOS. And it looks like we have various buttons there, which we can then do something in response to in this function at the bottom. So I think I understand this well enough to copy that chunk of code. And this is going to be in the buttons page. So actually, before I copy it over, I'm going to add a controller for the buttons page. And then let's copy this over. So we want to copy from there to there, I think. And then paste that in, and then let's take a look. So now when we tap dialog, we get this lovely dialog, and we can cancel and take it back to where we were. Wonderful. So what we've got here is pretty basic, but it's fairly attractive. It would definitely serve as the basis of a iOS or Android app pretty well. Once you've got this far with a framework and you've been able to recreate one of the demos, it's probably worth having a look at the documentation and just having a fairly brief examination to see if there's anything that you missed or any other functions that you might find useful as you're building your apps. Things like event lists are very useful as well. And just clarifying how everything fits together is a very good use of the documentation. So if you're keen on making a mobile app, I definitely recommend reading through the docs of App.JS. We're going to move on though to something that's pretty important when you're building mobile apps, and that is being able to store data permanently within the app. That's not something we've looked at before, but we're going to see how to do it now with the HTML5 tool local storage. So local storage is a way of storing data permanently for your website or mobile app on the user's computer or phone. It's pretty easy to use, and I'm just going to get rid of all our code here to avoid any confusion, because what we're doing here is not unique to App.JS by any means, but I am going to keep the Zepto.js so that we can use the jQuery features. There we go. So let's just shut down that, and that should be close script with a type of text JavaScript. All right, so the first thing that you should do before using local storage is check that the browser supports it, because some browsers don't, and you don't want to be assuming that your user's browser does and then have your app not work properly. So we check that it works using if and then type of, and then we look at the storage variable, and if that's not equal to undefined, then we're good to go. So for now we'll just alert local storage is go. And if it's not supported, then you might want to alert something, please upgrade your browser, or something like that, to let the user know that the local storage features of your app are not going to work. So let's have a look. Local storage is go. Fantastic. That should certainly be the case for pretty much any modern browser that you use. So then how do we use local storage? As I say, it's pretty straightforward. To save an item in local storage, we just use set item. So local storage with a capital S dot set item. And then we might want to set the user's name to be Rob. Simple as that. And then if we want to get it back, we just use local storage dot get item and then name. So let's take a look. That should alert Rob. That's great, but it's nothing too special until we comment out that first line, and then we run the app again, and it still knows who I am. And indeed, we can even shut the browser tab down, open it up again, and it still knows who I am. So this is really permanent storage unless your user actively cleans their browser cache, which they can't actually do. If you're working in a mobile app anyway, then you really can assume that this is permanent storage. So that's pretty much all there is to it, except you might want to store arrays in local storage. And that's not that straightforward. So I'm going to set you a challenge to go online and figure out how to store and retrieve an array in local storage. Go for it. Okay, hope you managed it. Let's do a quick Google. So I'd go for something like local storage save array. And here we go. JavaScript, how to store an array in local storage. So local storage only supports strings. So we'd need to essentially convert our array to JSON and convert it back in order to save it in local storage. So this looks pretty good. Let's use this code. So I'll comment out both of those lines. So we're setting up an empty array called names, and then we're creating a prompt that we haven't actually used before, but this is just like an alert, but it allows the user to enter some data, and it sets that equal to the first item in the array. And then it sets the item names within local storage to a JSON version of the array names. And then to get it back, we use stored names, JSON pass, so that converts it from JSON to an array. And then we just use local storage get item and then the JSON code of names. And then to check that that's worked, let's alert names 0. So that should be equal to the name that I'm just about to enter. Okay, here we go. So let's have a different name just for fun. So Kirsten, and then it's saved it as Kirsten there. And then let's just alert stored names 0, just to prove to ourselves that we have indeed got an array here and that the 0th value is what I'm just about to enter. So let's have a look. I'll put in Kirsten, and there we go. That's looking promising. But of course, the real proof of the pudding is that if we comment out the code to save the array and we just retrieve it, we still get the data back. Wonderful. So that's how we use local storage to save and retrieve variables and arrays. We are now in our position to create. So now I've got a pretty big challenge for you. Our aim here is to create a simple email client that we could use as a mobile app, which allows the user to send an email to and from anyone they like. So when someone first uses the app, they might send to a new user, and then they can put their email address in there, the from email, a message, nice and simple, and then when they click send, that links via Ajax to a PHP script, which then sends the email for them and returns true, and the app interprets this as a successful send. It also knows if, for example, there is no to field, that the email couldn't be sent. As well as that, the email addresses that are used automatically appear in the email address list here, and when the user clicks on them, it sets up an email to that email address. All of those are saved with HTML local storage, so they're stored permanently for the user. To give you a quick glance at what we're creating on the server side, we've got a fairly simple script which attempts to send the email and then creates some JSON, or more specifically JSON-P, to allow the app to read the response and know whether or not it's successful. So there's a lot to cover there, but I think you should be able to figure out at least most of that yourself. But of course, you're very welcome to watch me give it a go if you'd rather. Either way, best of luck. All right, I hope that went well. I'm going to start with the HTML side of the app and build up our user interface first, and then we'll create our PHP API when we're done. So I'm just going to Command Z all the way back to the App.JS site that we had a couple of videos ago. There we go. Just make sure everything's still working. Great. So I think I'm going to go for the blue menu bar at the top. And I'm going to do that just by adding the class blue to the top bar there. And then I'll just get rid of everything that we don't need. So we don't need the scroll page. I'm going to leave the keyframes in. They might be important for one of these animations. And we're not going to be using the color picker. So I'm going to get rid of all of that. So pretty much all the styles, in fact, are gone. So let's get rid of our color picker, but we will be using the app section here with our app buttons. So let's get rid of all of those apart from one, and we'll change the data target to send email. That's what I'm going to call the div of my email sending page. And then we can keep this section as well, but this is still going to go to send email. And I'll just change the text to send to new user. Okay, and then we don't need page 2. In fact, we don't need any of these pages. And we don't need this code either. So let's just leave it with an absolutely minimal code base. Definitely don't want to leave any code in that we're not going to be using. Okay. Let's just update the title to send an email. Click below to send an email. It's a pretty simple proposition. Obviously this lists section here is not going to be shown initially, but we'll leave that for now until we add all our local storage functionality. Okay, then as I mentioned, we're going to need the page from inputs here, which actually contains something pretty similar to what we're going to use to send our email. So again, I'm going to view frame source, and I'm interested in inputs. So let's Command F to search for inputs. There we go. So it's definitely called inputs. And here's the code that we need then for that. So let's copy that down and we'll have a look at it once we've copied it over. So this is an app page as we're used to. It's got a top bar. Let's rename that to send email. We might want to keep that button there. And then we've got search. We're definitely not interested in any search here. So I'm going to get rid of that line, but we'll leave the rest because we're going to want something pretty similar to that. And let's update the data page to send email. Okay, we should now be able to click on these and we get to the send email page. So let's now look at the send an email page in more detail. We're going to want a sender and recipient email address at the top there, and we can actually leave subject and message as they are. So let's call that sender email address, and we'll give it an ID of sender email. And then we'll have another section underneath with an input of recipient email. Okay, let's take a look. Great. So the first time the user runs the app, none of these will be pre-filled in. But once the user has sent an email, we want these to be saved. So let's add our code to do that. This is going to be in the send email page. So I'm going to copy the app controller code and add it for the send email page using the data page attribute there. And I want my code to happen when the send button is pressed. So let's first give this send button an ID. I'll call it send button. And then we want to run our code to set up the onClick function when the page is. So we're going to use the send email attribute here for our page name. There we go. And as always, I take things one step at a time and just do a quick alert to make sure, there we go, that we're and then we want to do something if is clicked. Now we've seen some code for that down here somewhere. Here we go. So it's a little bit different to what we're used to, but I think it's fairly easily transferable. So we're looking with this time, but the send button ID, we're making it clickable, and then when it's click, we're running some code. And again, things very simple to start off and see if that works. The button, wonderful. What we're really going to do here is attempt to send the email, but I'm going to add the code for that later on. For now, we're looking at our local storage, so let's make that happen. So let's start off by checking to see if local storage is available. So we look at type of and local storage, and we want to check that that's not undefined. And if it is, for now, I'll just put a message and saying that we'll alert the user that we couldn't save the data. It won't cause a problem with the email sending, it just will mean that we won't save their email addresses, etc. And then over here, we'll start off by saving the sender email address. Now that's nice and easy because there's only one of them. So let's just remind ourselves what we call that. So it's the sender email ID. So we're going to set local storage set item, and I'll call it the same thing. So sender email, and we want to set that to the value of the sender email field. So sender email again and .val. Now, before we move on to saving the recipient email address, I'm just going to check that that's all working. So we should be able to set up the email address here. So let's first check again to see if local storage is available. And I won't have an else this time. This time I want to check to see if a particular variable exists, and that is the sender email variable. So I'm looking for local storage get item sender email, and I can check that that exists to see by checking if it's not equal to null. And if it doesn't, then I want to update the value of the sender email input, and we do that using page.find and then sender email with a hash for ID, and we want to set the value of that to local storage get item sender email. So all of that should have the effect of, when we save our local storage data, when the user clicks send, we then load up the page again and we should see the sender email address populated there. So let's give this a go. I'll just refresh, and then I'll click to open up the email, and then I'll put in rollbackcodestars.com and then click send. So nothing happens there, but hopefully the local storage got activated in the background. And then I'm going to refresh again and click back on here, and there we go. It's been populated. Wonderful. So we're now saving the sender email permanently. Just to clarify that that is the sender email, I think I'm going to add a from text and a to text there. Let's have a look. Yep, great. Okay, so now let's do the recipient email address. Now this is a bit more complicated because we need to save it in an array, and we only want to save it if it's not already there. So first off, let's see if that array exists. So we'll check to see if local storage get item, and then I'll call it recipient list. So if that's not equal to null, then we'll set recipient list equal to that. In fact, what I think I'll do is I'll set the recipient list to be a new array outside there, and then I'll just update it if it does already exist in the local storage. So now we've got recipient list as an array, and it's either equal to the contents of the local storage or it's empty. So now we want to see if the recipient email address is in the array. That's the sort of thing there's probably a jQuery function for. So let's have a look. Check to see if in array, something like that. Oh, look at that, in array. Perfect. So let's jump down for an example. So we've got in array, and then we're looking for the item there in the array there. Okay, so let's do our check. So we're checking to see if the recipient email, which is this there. So if, and we want recipient email dot val, and we want to see if it's in the array. So we're going to use jQuery dot in array. And we're checking to see if that value is in the array recipient list. And we actually want to check that it's not in the array here. And you can see here that the value that we get from the inArray function, if it's not in it, is -1. So we're going to check to see if that is equal to -1. And because I've written quite a lot of code so far, I'm going to do a check at this point that we're still working and nothing's gone too horribly wrong. So let's just put something in there. And we've got a small problem there. I think it's because we're using jQuery here, which was what the example had on our test up here, but actually the standard for using jQuery functions is the $. So let's try using that instead. There we go. It could be that Zepto doesn't support using jQuery and $. So if it's not in the array, we want to add it to the array. Hopefully you remember how to do this. We use recipient list dot push, and then the thing that we want to add. So that is, of course, recipient email dot val. And what I'm going to do next is just log to the console recipient list, just to make sure that this is happening. So for now I'm just going to put 1 and 2 and then inspect, and let's have a look. We should see that we've got an array, and yep, it's saving each one, but it's not saving recipient list each time. That's not a problem. That just means we need to save it to local storage. So remember, this is an array, so to save it we're going to have to convert it to JSON because we can only store strings in local storage. So we'll use local storage.set item. The item that we want to set is recipient list, and the value that we want to set it to is JSON stringify and the recipient list array. And similarly, when we get it back, we're going to need to convert it from a JSON string to an array, and we can do that using JSON.parse, as we saw in the previous video. So now it should not only save the latest one, but save all of them. So let's save number 1. There we go, that's looking good. Now let's save number 2. Great, we've got 1 and 2. Number 5. Brilliant. So that's saving very nicely. One small thing I'd like to do while we're here is to put them into alphabetical order, so that the user's not looking down the big list of email addresses trying to find the right one. So let's see if we can find a way to do that. And we've got a few options here, but JavaScript array sort seems pretty perfect for us. So let's apply that here. So recipient list dot sort. Okay, so let's refresh, and then I'll put in the number 4 in my recipient list, and there we go. So not only has it added number 4, but it's put it in the right place as well. Just try number 3. Brilliant. Okay, so that's looking good. I do just want to get rid of those numbers so that we can replace them with email addresses. So I can do that just by commenting out this line once and then refreshing. And I'm going to put my friend at example.com. There we go. And that's reset the array. So if I now bring that back in and refresh the page, my other friend at example2.com, and then save that, we've then got the 2 email addresses saved. Wonderful. So we're almost finished on the front end side. The only thing I want to add at this point is for the user's email contacts to be listed here. So let's remind ourselves where that is. It's up here. So it's in app section. Let's give this an ID of contact list. And then what we're going to want to do is when this page is loaded, want to check to see if the user has any contacts, and if so, make them appear there. So we're going to be doing that on the home page here. So once again, we want to check to see if local storage is available, which we do that way. And then we'll also check to see if local storage get item, and what we're looking for is the recipient list. Is not null. And so if that's the case, we want to get our recipient list again. So let's create our array. And in fact, we can use the same code here to parse it, convert it from JSON to an array. Then we're going to want to loop through that array. You can possibly remember how to do that. But let's just remind ourselves, there we go, the jQuery each function. Let's get ourselves a nice example. Yep, that looks familiar. So we're going to loop through the recipient list array. And yeah, for now, I'll just alert value. So that should mean that when we load the app, it will alert, there we go, my friend at example.com, and then my other friend at example2.com. Great. I don't actually want to alert them though. I want them to appear where it says lists at the moment. So I want to take the contact list ID and add a number of divs to it, one for each recipient. Let's get some indenting first off. So we don't want to alert the value, but we do want to just take the contact list. So that's there. And we want to append to that div, which you'll remember means add on the end. And we want to put the value in there. All right, let's take a look. And something's gone wrong there. I think it's because we're doing this the old-fashioned way. And we actually need to search the page with App.JS. So we look in page and then find, and that's where we put our ID. So contact list. So just as we did it there. Let's try that again. There we go. Wonderful. And I'm just going to add in a little bit of code which hides the contact list if there's no contacts in it. So if the recipient list is empty, then we'll find the contact list in the same way and hide it. And just in case we need to, we'll show it there as well, because it might be that it's hidden and then we go back to it and we'll need to show it in that case. Great. So now back here, if we click on one of those, and at the moment nothing happens when we click those, and that's because when they were added in this way, the code attached to the data target field wasn't activated. So we're going to have to do that ourselves. And essentially we want to do two things when one of these buttons is pressed. We want to jump to the send email page, and we want to set the active email, the active recipient email that is, to whichever one has been tapped. So jumping to another page is not something we've seen how to do yet. So let's see if we can find it somewhere in the docs for App.JS. Let's have a look. So we're familiar with that. Things to note, we're pretty familiar with. Pages, this is where we are. Aha! This code looks very promising. So that loads the page home. Wonderful. That's exactly what we need. So let's add a new class to these links. We don't need the data target attribute anymore. So if we just add a class of redirect, and then once we've finished this process, we'll add our redirect function to those links. So we're going to need to look in the page again and find anything with a class of redirect. And as we did down here, let's make it clickable and then on click. Just check it. We need parentheses there and then on click. And we want a function. There we go. And I'll just put those on separate lines to keep things tidy. We usually have the dot at the beginning. There we go. So again, just to check that everything's connected, we'll just have a quick alert. There we go. Things are looking good. So we want to do two things. Remember, we want to redirect. So app load home. Let's do that bit first, because that's the bit that we're a little unfamiliar with. And we want to redirect to the send email page. So let's have a look first off. Wonderful. And then the second thing we're going to do is use local storage to save the email address so that we can access it again on the send email page and put it there in the recipient email address. So let's use local storage, set item, and I'll call it recipient email. And we want to set that equal to the value of this div, which we should be able to get using this and then HTML. So that will give us the HTML of the div that was clicked, which is the email address that we want. Again, just to check, I think I'll do a quick alert that that's going to get it right. And I think both of those should happen before we redirect the page. Otherwise, it might do the redirect and then not run our code. So let's check first of all. Excellent. We've got the data and then it's doing the redirect. So now we can get rid of the alert. And all we need to do now is add the code to make this recipient email address appear when the send email page is loaded. So we've already got a function here to check if local storage is up and running. So let's add our other function inside that. So now we're looking for local storage, get item, and the thing we want to get is recipient email. So let's check to see if that is not null. And if it's not, then we want to update the recipient email address. So we'll use page again to access the page, and then find to find our recipient email, which I think is just recipient email, but let's just check. There we go, recipient email, yep. And then we want to set the value to local storage, get item, recipient email. Brilliant. So now, oh, that's already worked. Wonderful. When the user clicks on one of these, it will save recipient email in local storage, and then if that exists, when we send an email, then it will update that other page. Wonderful. Just one tiny thing to fix. If we click send to new user now, then that will still remember the recipient email saved previously, which is not the behavior we want. So when the new user button is clicked, we need to remove the recipient email variable from local storage. So let's add an ID to that. I'll call it new user. And then we want to add some code for it. I'll do that once again inside the if local storage is defined if statement. So again, we want page find, and then I've forgotten already what I called it. New user. Very sensible. And then, not certain we need clickable, but I'll put it there anyway. And then on click, we want a function. And as usual, I'll do a quick alert to see if we're all connected up. We are indeed. And then ideally we want to remove that item from local storage, which is not something we've done before. So let's see if we can figure out a way to do it. Local storage, remove item. Aha, storage.remove item. That looks so perfect. I don't think we even need to click on it. And in fact, we've got the example in the second result there. So local storage.remove item. So let's try that. Remove item. And then the key is recipient email. And we do only want to do that if it exists. So we should do a quick check really. So if local storage dot get item recipient email is not equal to null, then remove it. Okay, so let's just check now. If we click send to new user, and that didn't quite work, and that's because the code to remove the item here is actually happening after the redirect takes place. So if we click done and then send to new user again, then we do have a blank email address here. So in order to stop that from happening, there's, as is often the case, a number of ways of doing it, but the way I'm going to fix it is to remove this data target from the app button class and then do the redirect manually. And so we'll check to see if we need to remove the item and remove it if we need to. And either way, we want to app.load the send email page. And this will just make sure that the item gets removed before the email page is loaded. So let's take a look. So now we've got it in the to field, and then we send to new user, and the to field is blank. So now our front end is working pretty much as we want it to. We've got our local storage saving our users' contact email addresses in alphabetical order, and they can click to send to one of those, or they can send to a new user. And either way, whatever email address they used last time is going to appear in the from field. So we're looking good. Now it's just the small matter of actually sending the email. And then of course, feeding back to our code here that the email has been sent. So to do that, we're going to need to use some PHP. We can't send email using JavaScript, but we can using a server-side language. So I've gone back over to FireFTP, and I'm going to create a new directory, which is going to be 9 mobile apps. And I'll create a new file within that called sendemail.php. So I'm then going to use Command O or Control O in Windows to open that up in brackets. And then let's just do a quick save to make sure that we've got it open, and then find it online. So it's going to be completewebdevelopercourse.com/content/9-mobile-apps/sendemail.php. Of course, your URL is going to be different depending on your domain name. Okay, so we've got two challenges here. One, we need to receive the data from the app to tell us who to send the email to, who to send it from, and what the subject and message should be. And then we need to report back to the app to say whether or not the sending was successful. So we're going to be using Ajax within the app, and we'll need to return our data in JSON format so that it can be read across domains. So let's set up our mail function first. I think we can lose the App.JS tabs, and I'm just going to do a quick search for PHP mail function, and then I'm going to jump to a Stack Overflow question. And here we go. So I've got some nice headers there. So usually getting the code from the web will save us a fair bit of time and get some accurate headers, hopefully, as well. So I'm going to be passing these as get variables. So we'll have 2 for 2, subject for subject, message for message, and then we'll be using from for from as well. There we go. So now I should be able to do a little test. I'm actually going to change that to an echo. So we'll see hopefully a 1 when this has been successful. So 2, I'll use rob at robpercival.co.uk, and from I'll use rob at completewebdevelopercourse.com. And note when you're testing, you're less likely to be seen as spam if you use a from email address which matches the domain name of the server that you're sending emails from. So that will help with testing. If it doesn't appear in your inbox, then spam filtering could be the problem. And then we'll have subject. It's just going to be test, and message. This is a test. All right, so we've got a 1. That's a good sign. And just to show that it doesn't send absolutely anything, get rid of the sender email address, recipient email address, and reload the page, then we don't have a 1 there. Okay. So that now seems to be working. So all that remains on the server side of things is to outlook JSON-P so that we can read it using Ajax in our app. Again, that's something we haven't done before. So let's see how we do it. Here we go. How do I create JSON-P? That looks pretty perfect. Have a scroll down. And here we go. So we create a callback parameter in the get variable, then return that as part of our JSON. So let's copy this code over. So this is what we need, but we need to create our JSON first, and we'll do that from an array. So let's set up a result array, and we'll have result success equal to the output of the mail function, which will either be true or false depending on whether it was successful or not. And then instead of using the data variable here, we'll use JSON encode result. And we've used the JSON encode function before, but it creates JSON from an array. Okay, so let's just have a quick look and see what that returns. So nothing at the moment because I haven't put the callback in there. So let's just set it equal to something, and there we go. Response, and then our JSON. And just in case there isn't a callback, I'll add some output there. Not that we particularly need that because it won't work without the callback anyway. But better to have that than nothing at all. Okay. So now we can shut down our send email PHP. And I'm going to put our code for the moment in the send email page. So as always, before I do anything, I'm just going to do a quick alert to make sure we're all connected up. And then I'm actually going to jump over to the Zepto page to get some code to work with for Ajax, just in case it's in any way different to the jQuery approach. If you want to stick with standard jQuery, of course, then you can get rid of Zepto and just add the jQuery JavaScript instead. But with any luck, here we go. This should work for us. So let's add our code. There, so we're used to the Ajax and get. The URL will start off just being this complete URL here with the callback in there. We'll leave the data as is for now. And then we should get a success field in the JSON. So we should be able to get that by just alerting data.success. And the final thing to check before we run this is to change from JSON to JSON-P. Now let's save that and refresh, and then there we go. We've got a false response, which is great. So next we need to send the correct variables to our script. So rather than just name is zepto.js, we need to send to, from, subject, and content. And I'm going to do that as just fixed variables for the moment. So I'll send it to rob@robpercival.co.uk. I'll send it from rob@completewebdevelopercourse.com. I'll set the subject to be test and the content to be just this is a test. Okay, so now when we run that, we should get a true response. There we go. Brilliant. So things are looking good. Let's then update our code so that we send the user's values of from to subject and content rather than these fixed ones. So if you remember, those are stored up here. So we've already got an ID for sender email and recipient email. So let's just add in an ID for subject and also for content. And now we can refer to those down here. So the to variable is going to be recipient email dot val, and then I'll just copy that, and the from variable is going to be sender email dot val. Subject is going to be subject dot val, and content will be content dot val. All right, let's just run that again, make sure we're still getting a true response. And there we go. Actually, yes, that's correct. We're getting a false response because we don't have a recipient email address in there at the moment. So that's what we would expect. Okay, so now I'm going to move this string to send the email down to where it should be, so on this clickable link, i.e. when the send button is clicked. So let's take a look. Let's add an email address in here and a subject and a message, and then send. And there we go. We get our true response. All right, so we're very, very close now. It's just a matter of having a more friendly response to the user than alerting true or false. So we're going to do that in the usual way. We'll have an app section div at the top of the page, which will initially be empty, and we'll give that an ID of message. And notice that we do see a little bit of that div, so let's hide it when the page is loaded. So page find, and we want message hide, and then we'll just show it when we need to. Okay, so down here, instead of alerting data success, we're now checking to see if data.success is equal to true. Then we'll set the message div content to your email was sent successfully. And if it wasn't, we'll just put a fairly generic error message. Your email could not be sent. Please try again later. And we'll actually do the same thing down here if we get an AJAX error as well. Okay, and for each of those, we'll also have to show the div so that the user can see it. All right, so let's take a look. I'm actually going to go back and let's send to that example. Hi, how are you? And then send. Your email was sent successfully. Fantastic. So that's actually as far as I'm going to go with this app. Well done for following all the way through. I hope you did manage to do a fair bit of it yourself. What you've created here could be the basis of almost any HTML-based app. Because what we've built is a nice looking and fluid front end based in HTML, and we've built a PHP backend as well, which for a more complex app could connect to a database and contain user login details or anything you like. So even though the usage here is pretty simple, the structure that we've used is extremely powerful. And I hope you're having ideas of apps that you could make in this way. There are, of course, many options for improvement here. One small bug you may have noticed is that if you attempt to send an email with a blank email address, it will save that blank email address in the list. So I'm going to leave that as a small challenge for you to figure out how to stop that happening. We also obviously don't have any validation on email addresses here, so we allow invalid email addresses, and we don't give a great deal of information in the error message as well. We just say the email could not be sent. So it'd be very nice to have some checking here to see that the email addresses were valid and that they were present and that there was a subject and a message. We could also do with giving the user the option to delete email addresses from their contact list if we wanted to. So plenty to do there, but also a strong basis for any app that you wanted to make. Once you've made your app though, the next challenge is to get it onto the app stores. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do using Phonegap. Now that we've built our fantastic HTML-based app, our next challenge is to get it onto the app stores. And as always, there's a number of ways to do this, but the simplest and quickest is to use a service called Phonegap Build. And we can find this at build.phonegap.com. Now, Phonegap was a system to package HTML-based apps in a format that could be submitted to the major app stores. It was then purchased by Adobe and rebranded Cordova. And as well as allowing your app to go on the app stores, it also allows you to use plugins to access deeper aspects of the device's functionality, like the accelerometer or the GPS or the microphone. So if you want to do things like that, then have a Google for Cordova plugins and see what else there is available. We're going to be focused here though on getting our app in the app stores as quickly as possible. So quickly scrolling down here, again, feel free to pause and have a read if you want to know more about Phonegap Build, but we're going to be focusing on the free plan here that allows you to have one app with a maximum size of 50 megabytes, and you can use all the major Cordova plugins. Not that we're going to be actively using any of those today. So click the completely free button, and then you'll need an Adobe ID. So I'll pretend that I don't have one and sign up for one. I'll use rob@codestars.com, and then I'll just put in a random password and then agree to the terms of use. And that will then sign us up and take us through to the apps page. And you can see we've got the option to import from GitHub or upload a zip file. And we're going to do the latter. So here are my files. I've just got one index file, and then I've got the CSS and JS and Zepto.js as well. So I'm going to right click on those and compress for items. And I'll just rename that app.zip. Okay, and then let's click upload a zip, and then we should be able to find it in mobile apps, and there it is. So that will then upload the file for you and prepare it, and I'll call it Rob's email client. Pretty simple, and then click ready to build. It will then start producing the various files to deploy for different platforms. So here you can see the Windows Phone version has already completed, so I can actually download that straight away and run it on my Windows Phone. Now I can do the same with Android as well, so that will download an Android file that I will be able to run on my Android phone. It's an APK, so if you've used those before, they're actually pretty easy to install on your phone. iOS, however, is a little bit more complicated. You don't just get a nice simple download for iOS, you need to do a little bit of work. And in fact, for each of these, you will need to do something called signing if you want to submit them to an app store. And signing is essentially the process of proving ownership of your app so that you can submit updates and generally control the app later on. That process is not trivial for either of the two major app stores. So I'm going to show you how to do it in the next two videos. We'll start with Android, and then I'll show you how to set up your keys and signature files for iOS. And at the end of that, you'll have something that you could completely submit to Google Play or the App Store. In this video, I'm going to show you the process for signing your app to get it ready for putting it on the Google Play Android App Store. Please note two things. Firstly, you will need to be a paid member of the Google Play Developer Console in order to get your app on the Google Play Store, and that costs $25 a year. And secondly, the instructions that I'm about to show you do update quite regularly, so please consider this a general guide, and you might have to do a little bit of Googling to get everything working in your particular setup. Having said that, we'll cover all of the main principles, and the process, once you know what's going on, is not too complicated. So I'm going to be following along with the Phonegap Build guide, which you can get by searching for something like Phonegap Build Android Signing. And that's what we want to do. We want to sign our apps to use for Android. And that first result there is what I want. So you should be on a page that looks like this. And the main thing that we want to do here is generate a private key, which essentially proves ownership of the app to us and is a prerequisite for putting the app on Google Play. So step one there, as you can see, download and install Java. So you may well have Java installed. I don't at the moment. So I'm going to agree and start the download. It's exactly the same process, by the way, on Windows. And then I'm going to open up that file that's downloaded. And on my system here, I have to double click on that icon, put in my password, and then just click through the setup steps. And there we go. Continue and close. Note that we can't test Java on Chrome, but we've completed the installation process, so hopefully we should be fine. Then we need to set the Java home directory. So follow the instructions here. There's two sets of instructions, one for Unix systems and one for Windows systems. I'm on a Mac here, so I'm going to click that first link to download the Java JDK, which is the Java Development Kit, which is slightly different to the version of Java that we just downloaded, but both are needed in this case. So I would download that first option there. And then you'll need to accept the license agreement and then choose your operating system. So if you're on OS X, then you'll click that one. If you're on Windows, if you've got a 32-bit machine, then you want the x86 version. And if you're on a 64-bit machine, you'll want the Windows x64 version. If you're not sure whether you're on 32-bit or 64-bit Windows, then just open Windows Explorer and right-click on the computer icon and then click Properties. Then click the System tab, and that will tell you whether you're on 64 or 32-bit Windows. If you really can't find out, then go for the 32-bit version because that will work on both 32 and 64-bit systems. Now I already have this installed, so I'm not going to go through this process, but again, it is just a matter of downloading it and then clicking through the installation windows. And then you need to set the Java home directory. So if you're on a Mac, you need to do Command Space to open up Spotlight and then Terminal to open up a terminal window. And then you use these commands here. So export Java home equals. And then you put the directory where it's installed. So it's probably that one or something very similar to it. And you set that to your Java home variable. I'm not going to do that because I've already set this up. And then you use that second line to set up the Java home path. On Windows, you do it slightly differently. You right-click My Computer and select Properties. And then on the Advanced tab, you select Environment Variables and then edit Java home to point to wherever you installed the JDK, which will probably be something like that. All right. Now it's time to generate our key. So on a Mac, go back to the terminal window. On Windows, you'll need to open a command prompt, which you do this by clicking the Start button and then typing CMD. That's CMD. MD in the box that appears, short for command, and that will get you something that looks very similar to this, but in fact looks a little bit more like that. Alright, don't worry, we're nearly there. Then you copy this command, not including the string part at the beginning, and paste that into either your terminal window or your command prompt, depending on whether you're on Mac or Windows. And then we just need to change these variables here. So I'll just put something fairly generic. So my alias name for the alias, and then jumping through, and then key store name. Key store for the key store name. If you were going to call your app something like email app, you might call this email app key store and email app alias or something like that. Then you press enter and it will ask you for a password. So I'd put in a nice secure one there. I'm just going to put in something fairly simple for now. And then you put in details about yourself. It doesn't matter too much what the answers to these questions are, but you should be able to repeat them later on, so keep them noted down somewhere. If you need to, then just type yes, and it will generate the key store for you, and you can enter a new password for this particular alias if you want to. I'm just going to leave it the same, so I'm going to enter. And there we go. So that's now stored the key store for me. So heading down here, you can see we're now ready to submit our key to Phonegap Build. So let's jump back over there, and we're going to need to click Signing Keys. So let's go to the drop down at the top and then Edit Account, and then Signing Keys, and we want to add a key for Android, and the title can be whatever you like, so email app key, and the alias I'd recommend having the same as the alias that you chose, so my alias name, and then we're going to choose file to upload our key store file. If you're on a Mac, you can go to desktop and then click Command up to get to your root directory, which is likely where the key store is saved, unless you saved it somewhere specific. On Windows, it will be saved in whatever directory you had open when you started the command tool. So in this case, it would be C drive /users/emir/desktop/tmp. But go back and check in your command window if you weren't sure what that was. So then going back over here, we'll choose file again, and we have to go back there again. So from the desktop, back up, command up, and then keystore name.keystore, and then submit key, and that's done. And then looking down at the options here, we then need to unlock our key to prove that we own it. So we can do that clicking the lock there, and then putting the password in that we entered when we created the key, and then submit. And if you get that right, it should turn into a little unlocked padlock symbol. So now we can go back over to our apps, or just the one app, and click on Android, and then we can click on the email client name, and then we can, on the Android version, choose the key that we've just unlocked, and then it will just verify that everything's okay. And if it is, then we'll be able to download a version of the app which is signed with that particular key. And there we go, looking good. So then we just download the APK as we did before. Brilliant. And you'll notice that when it's downloaded, it's got the release name in here. So this is a version of the app that we could put on the Google Play Store. Okay, so now we have our APK. We're no longer doing anything specifically with Phonegap Build. We just want to submit our app to Google Play. So we can search for instructions to do that. That launch checklist is very useful because you'll need to do a lot of checking and debugging to make sure your app works properly on different devices, as well as having things like icon images and launch images ready. But we're going to jump straight to the Google Play Developer Console. And here is where we can add a new application. Note that if you don't have an active Google Play Publisher account, you'll be prompted to pay the $25 to get one. And here you just put in the title of your app. So email app by Rob. And we'll start with uploading the APK. So here we go, upload your first APK to production. Exciting stuff. And then let's browse. And there it is, the APK file release version. So then it will upload that and verify all of the keys and make sure that it's a valid APK that can go on Google Play. Yes, and there is something I've forgotten here. We do need to put a package name in, but we can do that pretty easily. We just go back to Phonegap Build and click Settings, and then scroll down. We can put in a custom icon file here as well, which would definitely be a good idea if you're releasing a real app. And then here is where we put the package name. And this is usually something like com dot and then your company name or your name. So I'm going to go for CodeStars and then the app name. So email client by Rob. So it's like the reverse of a web address. Starts with com, then has company name or your name, and then the package name, and should all be lowercase and shouldn't include any strange characters. And I'll call it version 1.0 as well. And I'll just pop something in the description. Your description, of course, should be more detailed than that. There we go. And then we'll save that. And it will produce a new version, which we'll be able to download, and then we'll reattempt the APK upload. And with any luck, it'll work this time. And there we go. So let's now download the APK again. So same, but with a 1 after it. And we'll now go back to Google Play, upload another APK, choose the version that we've just downloaded, open that, keep your fingers crossed. And there we go. So that's now uploaded our APK. The rest of the process is a pretty standard form filling in process where we put in the title, description, full description, screenshots, icons, all of this sort of stuff, which of course you will need for any app that you want to release. But I'll leave that to you. I hope you've been able to follow that process along and that your head is buzzing with ideas of Android apps that you could release using HTML, JavaScript, and Phonegap Build. In the next video then, we'll see how to do. Okay, so now that we've set up our key and submitted our APK to Google Play, we're going to see how to do a similar thing for submitting to the iOS App Store. So just like with Android, we need to create a key, and like with Android, we'll need to pay some money to do that as well. Apple charge $99 a year to be part of their developer program, and you will need to pay that if you want to put your apps on the App Store. So assuming you want to do that, we start at the iOS provisioning portal, which allows us to provision our apps for iOS. So do a quick Google for that, and then click there. If you're not already signed in, then you'll be asked to sign in there. And if you're not already a registered developer, you'll need to create an account and pay the $99. But once you've gone through that process, you'll get to this page and you'll need to click Certificates. Then click Plus to create a new certificate. And we want an App Store production certificate to put it on the App Store. And then click Continue. And then we'll need a CSR file. Now you can create these on a PC, but it's a very complex process and I wouldn't recommend it. Essentially, if you want to be developing iOS apps, even HTML-based ones, I'd strongly recommend getting a Mac. It makes your life a lot easier. So here I'm only going to show you the instructions on a Mac, but if you Google something like create iOS provisioning profile on a PC, you will get instructions on how to do it. But I'll warn you, it's not fun. So we can follow the instructions here though. We need the keychain access app. So I've just used Command space to get Spotlight up and then start typing keychain access. And that will give you a bunch of keys that are stored on your device. And as you can see here, we want keychain access, certificate assistant, request a certificate from a certificate authority. So let's do that. Keychain access, certificate assistant, request certificate from a certificate authority. And then you can put in your email address there, common name and email address again. And I'd recommend using save to disk here, but you can email it to yourself if you prefer. And I'm going to leave the specify key pair information blank. And then we can just save it right there on the desktop. That will then save the certificate request. So click done, go back over to the Apple developer site, then click continue, and then choose file, and we'll choose the file that we just created. Click open, and then generate, and then download. So now we've created an iOS distribution certificate. Now we need to create our provisioning profile. So I'm going to hold down above the back button and go back to certificates, identifiers, and profiles. And that will take me to here. And this time I want to go to provisioning profiles. And once again, I want to create a new one. And this is going to be an App Store distribution certificate. So click continue. And we need to have an app ID to be able to create a provisioning profile. So I'm just going to control click on app IDs over here and open that up in a new tab. And then we're going to create a new app ID. And I'll just call it email app by Rob again. And here we need to specify the app ID. Now we set this up in the previous video when we were setting things up for Android. It's the same as the package name there. So com.codestars. Whatever you want to call your app. That's our bundle ID. And then we don't need any of these special services, but if you did, you could select them there. And then continue. And submit. That then creates our app ID. So we'll click done. And now we go back over to our provisioning profile page, refresh that. And let's just select that again. Distribution App Store. And we should now be able to select, there we go, email app by Rob. Continue. And then you should choose the certificate that we just created. So for me, that's this one. It will last for a year. And then continue. Add a profile name. I'm just going to use the app name there. And then generate. There we go. And then we can download that provisioning profile. Lovely, nearly there. We now need the certificate and key bundle, which we create in Keychain Access. And we do that by clicking File and Import Items. And then we import the certificate that we've just created. And you should be able to find it by its expiry date. So 1st of March 2017 for me. And then we control click on that and export. So finally, we can save that as our P12 file on the desktop as well. And again, enter a nice password that you'll remember but will not be easily guessable to protect that. And then I'm just going to enter my machine password. So we now have all the files that we need to upload to Phonegap Build. So we scroll back up, click on our profile at the top there and edit account. And then we click sign in keys. And just as we did with Android, we're going to add a key for iOS. So title, I'll just put the name of the app. So email app, in fact, email app key, why not? And then we need the P12 file. There it is. And we need the provisioning profile as well. So that's the .mobile provision file. Okay, submit those keys. And once again, we're going to need to unlock them. So you put in the password that you entered for the certificate. And then if that works, it should be unlocked. Then we go back to apps. And just as we did for Android, we click on the app name and we select our iOS key. And we wait and hope that this is all going to work and that we'll be able to download our file. And there it is. Wonderful. So instead of an APK, we get an IPA file for working with iOS. So I'm going to download that again to my desktop. Now all that remains is to submit our app to the App Store. So let's open up a new tab to do that. And we do that in an Apple website called iTunes Connect. So itunesconnect.apple.com. And again, you'll need to have a paid developer account to be able to access this. But if you've got one, you should be able to get in here. And then we're just going to create a new app on iTunes Connect and upload the file that we've just downloaded. So let's go over to My Apps and then plus to create a new app. So again, I'll call it Email App by Rob. Bundle ID, we should be able to choose the bundle ID because we've already created it. There it is. Email App by Rob. Primary language, English. And then the SKU here is the app ID. So we'll select that again so we don't make any mistakes. And then, don't forget to select iOS and then click Create. Here we go. So as with Android, there's a bunch of information that you should fill in about your app there, and you can click Features and you can select pricing and availability information there as well. But the bit that we're interested in is the Prepare for Submission. And here is again where you'll put your screenshots, description, keywords, etc., etc. But the main thing for us is the build. So you'd normally use Xcode if you were making a native app, but we're going to use Application Loader 3.0. So that will download the Application Loader app to your computer, which is what we'll use to upload the IPA file that Phonegap Build created for us. And once that's done, open up the downloaded file, which will install Application Loader for us. Double click on Application Loader.package, install, enter your password, and this will then go through the installation process for the Application Loader. There we go. So close that down, and then I'm going to use Command Space to open up Spotlight, and then we should find Application Loader in Applications, agree to the terms and conditions, put in your Apple ID and password. You can keep yourself signed in, and then this will sign you into iTunes Connect. and we want to deliver our app. So let's choose that. Then we select our IPA file that we downloaded, and then it will link that to the application by the SKU, that is the com.codestars.email client by Rob in my case. So then click next, and then it will upload to iTunes Connect for us. Once again, keep your fingers crossed. And then we have some warnings there, but that should be okay. We can add the icon files in iTunes Connect. So just click next, and then done. And then if we refresh the page here, we should see the app as being uploaded, although it can take a little while. So we might not be able to see that here. No, we don't have the build quite yet, but that can take an hour. So from here, it's just a matter of adding your screenshots, descriptions, etc., and then submitting for review. It usually takes about 10 days for your first app to get reviewed, and with any luck, you'll be successful and you'll be on the App Store. I've now waited about 10 minutes and I received an email from iTunes Connect saying that the processing has completed. And if we now scroll down to build, you can see it says select a build before you submit your app, and then you can choose that build that was uploaded. Obviously we'd want to update the icon there and click done, and that's your build. So from there it really is just a matter of filling in the various images and description, etc., before submitting your app for review. So congratulations if you've managed to follow along and create all of the various different provisioning profiles and certificates. And that brings us to the end of this section. So you now know how to make both front-end and back-end sections for a mobile app, as well as how to package that as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files, and then use Phonegap Build to repackage it again for all the different app stores. And I've shown you specifically how to work with iOS and Android. The processes for the other app stores are fairly straightforward as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this section. Now go off and make the next viral app.